because in 1990 we did something to attempt to deal with ethical coaching, which may not have occurred in your time, is something that parents had to deal with, cope with. And sometimes some of the things you had to put up with weren't necessarily, in my mind, professional or ethical. They were designed for them to get to the NHL, and it's lent itself to a real fractured minor hockey environment, which in fact is a very unhealthy competitive environment when you look at what it does take to win.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to your thing, and I'm sure glad you got Tom Rennie to put that on because it's very valid. But I believe in 1990, had we been able to get this instituted in coaching education, they may have been able to coach differently and also influence parents and the boards that get elected to administrate and lead more ethically. So that's sort of where I come from on it. And our line is with the young athlete is to transmit belief. And that's what we look to do. And my reason for concern was I believe you're from your boy grew up in Ontario.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I was hoping Lisa Haley would get on. She's the head coach at Ryerson. And Lisa's coached in a couple of Olympics, as have a few of us. And Lisa is really in the middle of what you're writing about with her sons in Bantam AAA hockey in Ontario. So things have not changed despite your efforts of writing a book. And we're on the same side as you on this topic. And in my mind, the problem isn't the parents. They have to cope with it. But I still think we've got work to do on the coach education side, which I believe can help solve the problem because good coaches, they will last a long time. So that's just my 2 bits worth. I love the book. Your son impressed me. Like he got it.
Yeah.
And he always got it. Adults don't get it.
So true. Yeah.
And that's the essence of the book. And we're dealing with parents, and a lot of the interviews, and there was some BC coaches was almost saying you have to cope with whatever it is because whatever it is the way it is. If it is the way it is, it could be different. It should be different.
Mm-hmm.
What Dave and I initiated in 1990 was precisely to deal with the dilemma of what we're talking about today. The Good of Game, the document that I sent you, is related to an activity that was initiated years ago. Dave, my concern, and this is to everybody, I first witnessed it in novice hockey in a fun game, Novice 7, and the double shifting of the best players when they were up 5-1 and addressing it with the coach who I knew because I coached him in high school sports. And the word got to the president of the association who told me to mind my own business. Now, that was criminal to me. A major junior team or even an NHL team, the art of coaching is managing the bench to get the most out of all your players, making them feel valuable and having a role. And that's not what's happening in competitive hockey today. The elite, the so-called elite players that want to get that ice time, that want to get drafted, are getting it for the sake of the outcome, and they may be developing bad habits, staying out too long. And I say manage the ice time by behaviors. If they don't stay out too long, if they are disrespectful in their behavior in any way, then that's a sign to not to sit, not to play at higher levels. So where we're coming from here is what you've been through in minor hockey, and a problem you're trying to help out with is what I've been dealing with for 40 years, ever since we wrote the Goals 3 video script, which just never came to fruition. So it's not dead yet, but we're still trying to make it work so that the best players in the world are going to be the best people in the world. And even average players are going to be the best people in the world. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. I wanted to share that with you.
What's your feeling on parent coaches and how to separate the roles between being just a dad or a mom or being coach?
I think it's important. I know in our situation when there was parent coaching, and my husband actually parented my son, and I found it more the opposite in that he was a lot harder on him. He was much quicker to pull him and quicker to. So in that way, he was emotionally involved, on the opposite end of it, kind of thing, which doesn't help either. I do think there needs to be some form of, so what they've done here in Belleville is they will have somebody that isn't a parent, an outside person who is sort of a coach mentor, and the parents can talk to them to then talk to the coach to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm finding. And the coach mentor kind of coaches the coach. So I think that helps with parent coaches. And I will say some of Brock's better coaches were the parent coaches. When we got into some of the former professional hockey players, and not saying anything bad, but when we got into some of those, some of them were more there to tell their story and the things that they'd done, and they it wasn't as healthy. So I just think in all cases there has to be an outside person to be somewhat accountable. Like I don't, from my perspective, from my grassroots being the mom, watching, is that what it came down to, and throughout the book we did have some pretty brutal experiences with some of our coaches in that they were let go, a little bit of inappropriate stuff going on, and inappropriate, I'm talking language, that kind of thing, really, really bad. And I think it comes down to it having coaches with character and having coaches with integrity and having coaches that are ego aside and are there for the kids, and yes, they want to win and they want to develop them, and if somebody can sort of gauge that and see that and be a mentor and know that that's happening, and if anything outside of that is happening, then it's dealt with. That's the only way I can kind of speak to it. I just think they have to be accountable to somebody other than the parents, because the parents are going to make them accountable if their kid isn't playing enough, which isn't fair to the coaches. So to have somebody on the outside that knows what they're doing, that is strong, and that stays close to the game, and whether they're paid for that, I don't know. That's what I would see working. So if that's kind of what you're speaking to, I would say yes, that would be good.
Right on that point. I love what you said there, Allyson, because it would for sure depend on sort of the philosophy and the approach of that quote unquote pro coach mentor. Like if he's a pro coach and coaching to win and coaching more for himself, as you pointed out, if he's in it for the kids, great. If he's got a real pro coach mentality, no disrespect, Dave, haha, because I was one myself, and we all are. But and the right philosophy is obviously the key thing. And I'll, like, Kim, if you want to ask something on this topic, absolutely go ahead. I just had a quick related question, like for Allyson, like on this topic, what was your best coach experience as parents, like parent coach, and or that coupled with a good experience for Brock? Like, is there somebody that sticks out?
Yeah.
Next.
It would be his goalie coach, interestingly enough. So his goalie coach was somebody who was very good. So Brock, and I need to say this, that I think it's important that kids are coached in a way that they are at their best. They'll be their best at the game, and especially if they're wanting to move up and do more, you've got to have that competitive edge. So I think that's important. His goalie coach never ever cared if he hurt his feelings. Never cared if he hurt our feelings. Never. There was no gray area. You're not working hard enough. And they formed a trust, and he was part of his experience for a lot of years. And I remember he had wanted to call him up to play on a team, and he came to watch him to see how he was doing. And Brock didn't have a good game, and he knew what his abilities were, but he didn't have a good game. And he spoke to him after, and Brock said, "But you know how I can play." And he said, "But you didn't show up for me. You didn't show up for me. You assumed you got it, and you didn't show up for me." And it taught Brock, and the next time he was able to do it. And I remember contacting him once saying, he didn't make the team, and he seemed like he was so close, and he said he wasn't good enough. He wasn't good enough. Other people are going to be better. He wasn't good enough. And so all along it was respectful. He was never, he wasn't a screamer. He was just very methodical. This is what you need to do, and you just need to be better, and I'll help you do that. So I would say he was a best experience, and they're still friends today.
But I do think there's very different expectations. I would love to hear a little bit of your experience with that, and if you had, or you and your husband, or even your son had that mindset of, because it was a non-parent, did you treat them differently, or did you have different expectations than someone who was volunteering their time?
Yes. And before I answer this, I need to tell you, I have since learned from this. So when my son was in his draft year, there was a younger coach. He was a good coach. And of course, he wasn't there long. They ended up, anyway, I had a lot of expectations from him. He had come in and we had a meeting about, all the things that he did and what his expectations were. And so if he didn't sort of come and give me the time after, or give us the time, or wasn't fully communicating, and at that stage in the game, he should have been communicating with Brock, not with us. Brock at that point is 15 years old, 14 years old. So there wasn't a lot to talk to us about it. So I felt very frustrated. I felt at that level he should be speaking to the parents, and this was his role, and he's getting paid for this. Fast forward to after Brock's done playing, and my husband is coaching minor midget. He's coaching a draft team, and 10 of the kids got drafted from this team. So highly, highly competitive. And the expectations of the parents. So my husband would work full time, come home, scrape off his car, go to a practice an hour and a half away, was never late, did all the, and we'd have parents calling, ticked off about this or ticked off. And I'd be like, this cannot be your full-time job. And I remember my husband kind of kept his mouth shut, and we were at a tournament, and the first year tournament always fell on our wedding anniversary. So we'd always go to a tournament and try to steal a dinner. So his team was playing draft year, beginning of the year. We hop on an elevator after a game to go for dinner, and one of the moms gets in the elevator and presses door close, and she starts to talk, and so my husband just nicely said, set up a time with me, we'll have a meeting after. And she walked out, and we went out for dinner, and I said, I cannot believe that woman did that. I cannot believe. And he said, that was literally you 5 years ago. That was literally you. And her expectation was, you are here for this full weekend, even after the game, at the hotel for me. And so I can say I've seen both sides of it. And now when I get out and speak to parents, I will say to them, your coach puts in this amount of time, and after the game, when it's over, that's when it's your time to be a parent. Let the game be over, and he'll coach your kid when the time comes. So that's a long answer. That's a really long answer, but that's kind of my experience on both sides of the fence. So on the parent side, the way I coach the parents now, if I'm talking it, and throughout the book, it's kind of the same thing, is what I will say is, if your kids are not unsafe, and if they're not in a situation where you are worried about them as far as it's going to be damaging to them, that kind of thing, then you are not at the coach's door. If they are coaching, if they're on the ice with them, if they're teaching the skills, that's what they're there to do. If your child is upset because they're not getting enough ice time, it is your job as parents to help them manage that, to say to them, okay, What are you upset about? Could you work harder? Could you do this? You know, you're there to kind of hug them at the end of the game. That's not on. And it's also your job to teach your kids, okay, how do I have that conversation with my coach once they're at a certain age? But how do I have that conversation with my coach? On the coach's side, what I have said before is absolutely have the boundaries, the 24-hour rule, or send me an email, you know, then we can have a conversation. But if the parents are following those boundaries, make sure you are calling them back. Make sure you are meeting with them. Don't let that go and start to assume that, oh, that's just the crazy parent. That's just, but on the same note, if you've answered the same question 3 times to them, you say to them, I don't have a different answer for you. So if you reach out to me about this again, I'm not going to be able to respond. I've got this many other kids to look after. So I think if you're answering the same question over and over again to a parent about ice time, about this, about that, I think you're well within your rights to say, we've had this conversation twice, 3, however many times you set it up. I think this is as far as we go with it. Your son or daughter is not the only one on my team.
Dave talked about parent and coach continuums. And I believe that chapter is sort of related to the work that Allyson's doing. And I wonder if you would mind if if you could just talk about that continuum a bit in terms of the ethical piece of coaching and where the line might be more acceptable.
From the parent's perspective, I felt there was a continuum between constant scrutiny. They go to a game and they constantly scrutinize their kids' play. Allyson, at the other end, there's observing and enjoying. I've seen people that go to the games and that's all they want from their child is to observe and enjoy and see them having some fun, and they see a bigger picture. So there's a balance somewhere in there between those two. There's pressure feedback, which you talked a bit about, and then there's supportive, encouraging feedback. To me, that continuum is really, really important for parents. There's appreciation for tactical skill development, but I think a parent also has to have an appreciation for the socialization, psychological skill development that's going on for the youngster playing a game, because it's important to be part of a team. It's a good, positive experience. So there's a continuum there. And then there's a continuum where there's over expectation. At the other end, you've got having fun and enjoyment. And that's a perspective some people have a lot of over expectation. And my feeling is, in my days with hockey schools, and I see Alan Andrews is on, and he's an expert, a lot of times parents want it a lot more than their kids do. And that is sometimes the essence of the problem. So in my book, again, I'm not an expert, but I just tried to give the reader some food for thought, because I always talk about balance in what you do, no matter what you do in life, what your profession is, if you're a coach or a player, whatever, I mean, any role in life, if you achieve some balance, usually it's because you see a bigger picture. You see the game, you see the activity or the job in perspective. My guy lives in Calgary, and he's been a coordinator for a zone for 20 some years, Andrew has, and he's also coached ring ed and hockey for 20 years. And the stories he tells me about it is very interesting. And so I don't have answers more than I always talk to parents about balance, making sure that the youngster wants to come back and play tomorrow, kind of measure success in smiles versus everything else, you know. So thanks, Wally. Thanks, Wally.
Do you mind passing the name of your book?
Yeah, my book is called Loose Pucks and Ice Bags. Strange title, I guess, but it's a book that's a portion of it's good for fans and spectators, I think, a little bit, but it is a book for a hockey coach. Yeah, I called it Apple Pie in the Sky. ... I don't think so. So the whole part of the chapter, Allyson, is about, I like what Hockey Canada and USA Hockey are doing with their programs now in terms of some small ice thing. They're helping coaches learn to guide versus just instruct. They're doing more work on coaches trying to see some perspective in the game, what their role is, its development, to enjoy the activity. If they're not enjoying it, likely the kid's not enjoying it. So it's just a chapter on perspective. That's all it is.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I wrote down two things that you said there, Dave. One of them was the socialization, and the other one was the big picture. So one of the things that I always talk about when I go out and speak is that my son, as he came out of hockey and he started to apply for jobs and started to look at career and all that kind of thing, he knew how to go into a job interview, and if he didn't get the job, he would hold his head up. He knew how to dress for the interview, first of all, and he would hold his head up, he would shake the person's hand and say, thanks so much for the opportunity. And I feel really strongly that learning about disappointment every time he got cut taught him so much. You don't always get the relationship you want. You don't always get the job you want. Things like that happen in life. And I think the things that he learned from that, from hockey and from the game, have sustained him. And you all know this. You all know this. I didn't know it at the time because, again, I was too caught up in him getting far in the game. The stuff he learned outside of that has been invaluable. So that whole piece about the big picture, and the other So my job outside of this writing is I do counseling, and I work with something called Safe Talk. And Safe Talk, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's recognizing the signs and symptoms of somebody who is thinking about suicide. And the day that I was invited to go speak at Hockey Canada for my first talk, the morning, my daughter's really good friend, a young man, he was a goalie, died by suicide. And he waited till the end of the hockey season. So his mom said when his mental health was suffering, as long as he was playing hockey, he would not let the team down. It was a place for him to go. It was a place for him to be social. He wasn't being bullied on the ice. He didn't have his devices with him. And at the end of the hockey season, when hockey was over, she always worried about him. And I found out the morning I was going to speak that he had passed away. So as part of my talk, I talk about that. And the other piece of socialization is, as these kids get to know each other and as they get close to each other, if you've got a parent and if you've got a child that's good enough that they keep moving up and moving up and moving up, and it becomes their whole life, part of coaching and part of parenting in this, I think, has to be, what do they do after? What do they do after? Their whole schedule, their whole life, all of their friendships have been based on this game. And then you reach an age where you're starting into a career that you don't necessarily love. You have to go off to school, and maybe you didn't make the team in university. What do we do after? And as much as we hear it all over, and I know that it's, especially right now during COVID, it's a big thing. Mental health with kids needs to be looked at in the game, because the game can be a huge help in that area. And I don't think we look enough at what happens next for the kids that are going to move on and maybe don't make it. So those are just two things I wanted to say speaking to that. So sorry, Jordan, I went on a little long, but yeah.
No,
That was good. Thank you.
no, that's great information, Allyson. And I think that I'm a huge advocate for mental health in youth, obviously with the role I play in my profession. And no, that's good information, and always a great reminder that we don't necessarily know what's going on in their worlds beyond what they're doing in the time that we see them. We see that obviously in schools, where whenever we're leading up to a long or an extended break, that we'll see students' anxieties ramp up, certain students, because we know that they're ramping up to some dysfunction in their life, and that the school is that place where they feel safe. And same with, as you're saying, with that young man and the sport, that hockey is everything. And when that hockey goes away, it leaves a huge void. So thank you for that reminder. And you answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you talked about your mental health background. I was going to ask where you came up with the idea of journaling your issues or your frustrations as a hockey mom. And I think that because that obviously was a key way of you learning from your own experience. And I love the message that you're providing from what you've learned, and that piece. And I know that, Malcolm, you're talking about other parts of the world. Well, it just happened that one of my staff members gave me this novel for Christmas. It's called Beartown, and it's set in Sweden. And when you're reading through it and reading between the lines, the hockey parents in Sweden are every bit as hockey crazed as in Canada. And that book, funny enough, could have been set in any northern junior hockey town in any province across Canada. So it was a really interesting read. But the question I actually have for you, Allyson, is what do you think that hockey parent that you were needed from a coach, or what could a coach have provided you at that time that would have satisfied what you were thinking or feeling, or is there anything that without you having to be reflective through journaling and coming to your learning in it, is there anything that a coach could have provided you?
That's a really good question. So two sides. I think probably if I was given the best information from the best coach in the middle of it, I couldn't have heard it like I can now, because I wasn't in the middle of it. That said, like I said, my son's goalie coach, when he said to me one time on the phone, when I said, I thought he was going to make this team, why didn't he make this team? And he said to me, he's not good enough. The other guy's better. He's not good enough. As a parent, when you go through this, you'll often hear parents say, well, I brought my brother. My brother used to play hockey and he watched my son and he said he was so good. Or I brought a friend of a friend who used to coach so-and-so. If you have a relationship with somebody that is giving you opinion on your child, they're not necessarily going to be honest. So that coach brutally saying to me he wasn't good enough, and he didn't care how I felt. He didn't care how I thought. He didn't care if we continued on as a goalie coach. So I think just that brutal honesty, it shocked me. And I remember having an argument with my husband saying, I don't really like what he had to say, blah, blah, blah. And my husband said, you can't just like him when he says good things. If you trust him when he says good things, you can't not trust him when he says bad things. And so just that brutal honesty, I think, in a really respectful way. I know it's hard to hear, but he's not there yet. If he works hard enough, he'll get there, or he won't. But either way, he's going to be okay. So I guess that respectful honesty was helpful to me at the time, even though I didn't like him when he said it to me, but it obviously stuck with me and it helped.
I'm gonna come. That's awesome, Allyson. I really love that little anecdote there. I'm gonna come to you, Alan, for maybe some comment, because you're such a long time guy with working with young kids and everything. But I really love that part about trusting him when he says on or good things versus trusting him when he says not so pleasant things. It's the honesty is a real crucial issue, and kind of the best one of the best people I worked with at the NHL level was exactly the same, Emil Francis. A good man, a kind man, but an honest man, and we all respected that immensely. If you weren't playing well, that's what he said, and he didn't say it in an angry, offensive kind of way. It's just, hey, you know what? You didn't have your night last night. You weren't good enough. You need to do this. We need this from you. So I totally appreciate that perspective. Alan, give us your thoughts at this point in time. Alan's one of our great whites, Allyson, out in PEI.
Yep. I just wanted to introduce Alan a little more. So Alan's Coach Crosby when he was 4 and 5 years old, and many of the NHLers that had gone through his system have been coached the right way. I don't think anybody else in the country has been coached the right way, including your boy. And I'm going to let Alan talk to that because the way he's talking about his life skills first, hockey skills second, and dreams your third, accomplishing your goals. And you need a dream beyond the dream. So I'm going to leave.
And Allyson, I just love what you did in the book. I didn't read it all yet, but the parts I read were great, and I got introduced by a cousin of yours to your book, and got a Christmas gift. Anyway, well, you know what? I think that dreams are important, relationships are important, and having a goal and dream is important. And if you care about people, they'll listen at any level. People need to know you care before they'll listen to you. And if you show them you care, they'll forgive you for mistakes as well. And I've seen so many kids. Like I had a boy that had a problem at home. I just relate this recently, and he was a big 6'4" goalie whose family was split up, and mom was an alcoholic, and he was just in chaos. And but very bright, and he was in the dark spot for years. But I sort of looked after him, kept him in view, and all of a sudden he disappeared. And on the weekend he was working a night shift. He graduated from high school. He's working a night shift at the bridge, checking people in and out for COVID. And on his way home at 7 a.m, he sent me a note. Can I call you? And I got it an hour later, so I called him, and he basically said that you're going to do something, that I could do something great with my life. And he said, I just called to thank you. And he's going to study psychology in the fall. He seems to have gotten over a lot of those kinds of things, and his life seems to be a little bit in a better place. And so I think that those are the things, that the rewards that really count for me.
I just love what you said, and I think that speaks to the difference that you can make. So that conversation and how you helped that young man in a dark time in his life, and where his life is going to go now, and that you're the person that he called. That's what a coach can do. And that's the whole, when I talked earlier about integral and having somebody that is a good person and who isn't just there to make sure that these kids are going to get them to a championship, that they know the kids and they have a relationship with them as much as you can, or even just aware. You noticed he was in a dark spot. I've said when I've got out and spoke, if a young man or a young woman comes on the bench and they're not themselves, or they look a little odd, or something looks off, you don't have to become a counselor or a therapist in that moment, but you just have to have a background or a backup, somebody that you can call to say, okay, I think something's going on with this person, with this young man, young woman, and we need to help them. And it's just having that awareness, I think. And that's just paying attention. That's just paying attention. That's not making it about yourself as a coach. That's making it about the kids. And that's just my 2 cents on that. So.
And played junior A, and then he went to Cornell, and Ottawa wanted him to sort of come partway through his degree, but he stuck it out and finished his degree, and then he played 10 years in the NHL. And the last I heard, that he was thinking about going back to Cornell to study medicine, which if we can prepare kids for the dream after the dream, that's really important, and makes that transition a lot easier. Or interject into their lives advice as to, well, what would you like to do in hockey? Would you like to be a manager, or would you like to be a coach, or would you like to do something else in hockey? But also, there's all kinds of other things out there and that you can do. And we try to train them really young to get up on their feet and speak and do a lot of outside reading. But I'm going to finish with that because I want to hear you guys.
Thanks. I wanted to just share, I'm not sure if other provinces have this, but I know in Ontario, the OWHA, the Women's Association, offers free confidential counseling for players. I've had 5 different players who have had, various, challenges going on with them. Parents are divorcing, suicidal thoughts, and I've referred them to that confidential counselor. So I just send an email and they connect through text, and they never need to know who the person is. I don't even know who the person is. But the players have found it really, really valuable. So I'm not sure if different hockey associations have that available, but I know it's saved quite a few of my players, and been a great resource for me. So I didn't feel like I had to shoulder all of the load. I could sort of pass it on and delegate some of that responsibility. I'm not sure that's the right word, but I love what Alan said about preparing kids for dream after the dream, because no one's making millions of dollars in women's hockey anytime soon, so they don't have the dream of McDavid and Crosby money coming. And so for me, a lot of that is getting them to give back in coaching. So for me, I've got 4 of my former players are now head coaches at Leaside, which is something I'm really proud of. All females, and but I had a question. It's a little different than kind of the tone we're on. So I have taken up this new role with our organization just this year. I created a survey for all the parents in our association. It got sent out to 1,500 people, and we had 400 people reply. And we asked them about the culture here at Leaside. So how do they identify our culture, and do they like it? Okay, so there's sort of 2 questions along those lines. And 85 to 90% of the people said, we have a supportive and encouraging culture. Okay, and they like that, right? So we've sort of got the check mark there of, the culture. We've created a culture that our customers, for lack of a better term, like. My question to you is, I've also been tasked with developing a high performance program. So I've coached in the AA, which in girls is the highest, in Ontario at least. I've coached in that loop my whole 12 years. I have a pretty good idea of what high performance looks like. And my question to you is, I don't know the answer to this, and it'll probably take 3 or 4 years to figure it out. But I don't want to lose that culture if that's what our customers perceive it to be, and that's what they want, while I develop a high performance culture. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I don't think they have to be conflicting. But I was wondering if you had any insights on that, on how do you balance that slightly different mindset, or is it a continuum? I was curious if you had any experience with something like that.
Oh, looks like we lost Allison's frozen up there.
Kim, I just wanted to mention, I dealt with exactly what you're talking about in Calgary. Female Hockey Calgary has a separate mission statement from the minor hockey system. And there's no difference in the philosophy of why you coach or participate in an activity. In the one, the outcome and expectation is higher, but you don't accomplish that expectation without the foundational base of the life skills you're going to learn playing the sport. That doesn't mean playing totally for fun and carelessly. So in my mind, there should be no separation of the elite from minor hockey, and that's the issue. You asking that question means the issue is those people who want to get to the NHL or the national women's team don't understand the life skills that it takes to get there. And so there's really no difference in the mission and why you play hockey at any level You may have higher expectations, but you still don't want recreational players to have bad life skills, to not work hard, to not want to improve, to be careless. So that's my own opinion on that question, um,
Well, and
because I
I
think that's
agree.
the reason for the problem that we face in minor hockey. Anyway, that's good. I'll leave that with you.
Sure. So my question was, you know, we've identified through surveys that our organization has what all our parents agree is a very supportive and encouraging culture. So that's how they identify us, and that's what they want. So 90% of the people in the survey said, we like this, we love the culture here. I'm in kind of in concert with continuing to keep that culture, developing our high performance program here at Leaside. So, you know, that mostly being, you know, the programming that we do for our AA teams, not necessarily anything different philosophy wise, but people are going to have certain expectations of quote unquote success, I'm sure, which I can manage from my end. But I was curious to your thoughts on that in terms of, you know, I don't want to lose that culture. And I think a lot of hockey organizations don't have that culture. So I'm quite proud. I didn't create it because I just sent the survey. But I also don't want to screw it up. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, you know, that continuum, or those, are there conflicting priorities? Do you see it all as just part of the bigger picture when you're dealing with, you know, players who have the dream at my level of playing for Team Canada versus the ones who are, you know, playing at the house league level, for example?
Well, I think just back to that, in your culture, one of the things you have is counseling for the kids, and that, you know, it's completely confidential, and so you recognize that piece of it. And you started out by saying that, you know, none of the in women's hockey, nobody's going to come out with the same contract like being a millionaire. So given that, they kind of go in with a healthy view of, we need to have something after. So I think naturally, just the way you speak about it, the way you look at it, I think keep doing what you're doing is what I would say. And the fact that you have 90% approval speaks volumes. And I will say this, and I don't want to be negative, but there is always going to be 10% of parents, at least, that you're not going to get through to, and those are usually the ones that need to hear it the most. So, I mean, that's my thoughts on that.
If I could interject, Kim and everybody, it sort of comes back. I have been sort of waiting for a moment. It sort of comes back to but in your lesson 3 video, I think you correct me if I'm wrong. You tell the story about Brock. I believe it's a 12-year-old, and I don't know if he was sort of a AAA guy at that time. I'm assuming so, but a peewee, and I feel like the video basically condones his coach for basically not giving him a developmental opportunity as the backup goalie in the playoffs. And that was the one thing in all those videos that kind of stood my hair on end a little bit. And it kind of gets, I think, to one of the points that Kim's making is, and Kim, correct me if I'm misreading, but I first wrote down, like, why should a supportive, encouraging culture be different in a high performance environment? It really shouldn't. But I get it from the point of view of playing time and organizational philosophy, and something we talk a lot about here. Wally can weigh in later about, you know, shortening the bench versus managing the bench. And I'm a firm believer that at some point, and the question is at what point, at some point, you know, it's important for kids like Brock and everybody else to learn that, you know, it's not all about totally equal ice time all the time, all the way up. They need to start lessons, but at what point? So I'm not sure there's just a question in there other than the old one about at what point and at what level do we sort of grant some permission to coaches in minor hockey to short the bench or manage the bench. And anyway.
And you know what? You're so right about that video, and you're not the first person who has given me that feedback. And what we didn't do well in that is that video actually matches a story in the book in which Brock didn't get played for the playoffs. And what happened was prior to going into, that was, I think, for a tournament, actually. Going into that tournament, I went to the coach and said that he hadn't been sleeping well, and he was this and he was that, and made a million excuses for him. So when the game came, the coach didn't play him. So the frustration, and I was totally wrong to do it. My husband was working shift work, wasn't with me, would have never had that conversation with the coach. And so the way that was, did not relay that well in the video, and that Brock was upset that I would have even had that conversation with him prior to. Go in and see how I do. You didn't need to set that up for me in case I failed, was basically the idea of it. But we did not relay that well in that video, and you're not the first person to comment on that. So I thank you for the feedback. It is, you're right. Yeah.
I almost wish that BC Hockey Alberta, I wish we could have a disclaimer sort of added onto the video, like, for coaches to consider, because it certainly seems to give them, it seems I pictured a number of coaches sitting there thinking, yeah, see, I get to play who I want, when I want, and it's not up to you parents.
Right?
Yeah. And Wally, I'll come to you right next. I'll just share a point right on that story. When I was coaching the women at University of Vermont, I'm embarrassed in some ways about my coaching experiences over the past, but it's at an elite level, and one of the girls on defense wasn't getting played quite as much or as regularly as, of course, her dad would like, and he was sitting straight across the rink from the bench, and in a loud voice, so everyone in the rink heard more than one occasion, "Mel, it's okay, the coach is an idiot," yelling across the rink, imploring me to play her more. And she was mortified after the game. And she's a terrific person, and kind of apologized. But the point obviously being, from your perspective, again, as a parent, like, consider your kids and their feelings and what they're going through. And it's not all about you as a parent. So pretty.
Yeah, and that's really the whole premise, right? Is that it was not my experience, it was his. But time and time again, I made it my experience. And I see that a lot. You see that a lot when you go into the rink, for sure. So I just need to say, now I do have a client this afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I have about 15 more minutes.
Allyson, like we've been in tune